TV.
Some of you are graduating summa cum laude. Some of you are graduating magna cum laude. I know some of you are just graduating thank you laude.
That was President Obama delivering the commencement address at Morehouse College yesterday. But after the caps are tossed and the celebrations end, many of these students will be faced with the harsh reality of paying back their student loans. The statistics are jaw-dropping. Last month marked the first anniversary of total student loan debt exceeding $1 trillion. It's now the second largest form of consumer debt, trumped only by mortgage debt. According to a recent report by the New York Federal Reserve, student loan debt has grown nearly 300% in the past 8 years, with the interest rates on some federal student loans set to double to 6.8% on July 1. Members of Congress are scrambling to find a solution that will hold them down. Yesterday, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand announced legislation that would help ease student loan burdens. And thankfully, she's in good company. Gillibrand joins Democratic Senators Dick Durbin of Illinois and Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts on a growing list of lawmakers pushing for student loan reforms. We're joined tonight by one of those lawmakers leading the fight on student loan debt, Democratic Representative Karen Bass of California, who recently proposed the Student Loan Fairness Act. She comes to us tonight from Washington, D.C. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us here in the War Room.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Tell us what the Student Loan Fairness Act, what would it do? What changes does it make?
Well, essentially, I think one of the most important things it does is cap permanently the interest rate to 3.4%. You know, just as you reported, student loan debt is more than $1 trillion now. And, you know, Senator Warren in her committee a few weeks ago talked about the fact that the federal government is making so much money, billions of dollars from that debt, that it's time that we allow students some relief. You know, what really worries me is that not only is a student burdened by the time they graduate with all this debt, but how are they ever going to be free to buy a home, to buy a car, to do all of the things that their education certainly should have rewarded them to do? The other thing that the bill calls for is that after 10 years, a certain amount of your loan would be forgiven if you pay it, on time and are consistent.
Well, you know, there are a lot of proposals, Congresswoman. What is being done to get a single bill that lawmakers, that students, that families can mobilize around?
Well, unfortunately, in my House, the Republican-controlled House is proposing a bill that would essentially allow the loan rates to fluctuate, you know, just like a variable loan that you might have on your house. And I think that's, you know, pretty bad. In terms of the Democratic proposals, though, I think there's a number of different proposals there, but they do have a number of things consistent, especially capping the interest rates.
You know, a new study from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that 30-year-olds with student loans are now less likely to have debts like home mortgages than those without student loans. They saw the same pattern with 25-year-olds and car loans. What kind of impact will delaying the purchases of these big-ticket items have on the economy as a whole?
Well, I think it hurts our economy. I think it hurts our economy terribly. And then, you know, you hear all of the rhetoric about how we shouldn't pass our debt on to the next generation. We're doing that right now today. And I just think that it's time that we take a step back. I know certainly when I was going to college, we never had to deal with issues like this. The other thing, too, is that it's the way they collect the debt. And so students are harassed constantly with telephone calls. 5 minutes after they graduate, they're already being harassed to pay back their loans. I just think it's an incredible disservice that we're doing to the younger generation.
Yeah, you know, one thing that always comes to mind when I hear about this is the politics of it. You know, if you are with students, when you're with America's youngest voters, let's be honest about it, and you're on their side, doesn't it sort of set the table well for these people to grow up remembering, oh, yes, that's the person, that's the party that made sure that student loan was both relieved, lowered, that they took the burden away from me, or that's the party that put the burden on me. Isn't there something to that as well?
Well, I definitely think there is. And one of the things that I've been excited about, because I'm always interested in making sure that the younger generation gets politically active. Well, the minute we put our bill out, there was a petition that students had signed, and I don't know where we're at now, but I believe that we're well over 100,000. When this legislation was introduced last year, there was over 1 million signatures on the internet in support of this proposal. So, you know, frankly, I think we need to do everything we can to generate their interest and their activity.
President Obama used his personal story with student debt on the campaign trail last year. Here he is speaking in Iowa. Let's take a listen to this together.
Sure.
Michelle and I graduated from college and law school. We had a mountain of debt. When we got married, we got poorer together. And we were lucky to land good jobs with a steady income, but we only finished paying off our student loans about 8 years ago. Think about that. I'm the President of the United States. It was only about 8 years ago that we finished paying off our student loans.
What happened to those students who were backing the president in this fight? Between immigration, guns, Keystone, are there just too many issues vying for their attention and energy now?
Oh, well, I think there are, but I think that it was one of the first reforms that the president instituted as soon as he got in, which was to take the industry back, you know, into government hands. And I think that that was very important. By the way, I tell the president's story all the time. The other thing that he says on the trail often is that the only reason he was able to pay back his loans was because of his book deals. I mean, he literally was a U.S. senator before he was able to pay off his loans. That's just incredible. And I really think that our country needs to take a step back and engage in an entire conversation over how we afford higher education.
And, you know, another thing that you cannot fail to talk about is that banks get bailed out, but students don't. Is there any way students can make sure their voices are heard on this debate? Because they don't have the lobbying power, let's face it, that the banks do.
Right, absolutely. I think that, you know, them coming together as a whole, I think there should be thousands of students here on Capitol Hill meeting with their representatives and meeting with their representatives back at home. I really think that a tremendous amount of pressure should be put. And just as you mentioned, I mean, if we look throughout our history, whenever there's been big social movements, young people have always been at the forefront of it. And so I do think that they have an awful lot of power to exercise.
Yeah, well, we're happy that you're there fighting. Full disclosure, Congresswoman Bass is my representative in Congress.
Yeah.
Which is great. We do need a right turn sign on the corner of Missouri and Barrington, but we'll get to that next time, okay? All right,
Okay.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, thanks so much for being on the show. Up next right here, Nuns on a Bus, the immigration tour. We'll catch up with Sister Simone Campbell right after the break here in The War.